Good afternoon, Anna. We are here for the second part of your program. We would like to hear the second part of the interview on Canada. Do you have some interesting questions?
Well, yes, only 4.
Only 4. Okay, could we hear the first one, please?
All right. Are there Eskimos in Canada?
First of all, Eskimos is not a word that is used anymore. It's considered actually very insulting. I believe it was the English or the French, when they first arrived to northern Canada, they started calling them Eskimos. I forget who exactly started calling them that, and what it means is people who eat raw meat, which for them is very insulting because they're not just simply that. But today we call them Inuits. So that's how they go. But yes, there are definitely Inuits living in Canada. They live in northern Canada for the most part, the largest communities. But obviously some of them live in some of the other big major city centers. But for the most part, yes, they live in the north part of Canada.
Under what conditions do they live?
Okay. When we think of Inuits, we think of them living in igloos, so these domes that are made of ice. While they do make them, they don't make them necessarily for living conditions. They live in houses equipped for their northern climate conditions, which can vary probably between, in the summer, 10, 15 degrees, and in the winter can drop down to minus 50 degrees Celsius. And they live in these houses that are obviously conditioned for the weather. But the igloos, the reason they make them is when they go hunting or some sort of big long trip. And so they're kind of temporary homes. They're for 1 or 2 days while they're hunting or whatever, but they're not made for permanent condition. And the other thing about also transportation, in terms of their living, they obviously use cars like we do. They use planes like we do. But in the north, it is very common in some parts to use dog sleds, and they get used as well. So these sleds, they get pushed by dogs, pulled by dogs, sorry, not pushed, pulled, and that's how sometimes some people get around.
Okay. If I went to Canada and wanted to see a good Canadian art, where should I go, and why should I go there?
Okay. I can, for the most part, speak about central Canada, so that would be mostly Ontario, so Toronto and Ottawa. And in Toronto, you have the Art Gallery of Ontario, has a very, very good exhibit with Canadian artists. Another really good exhibit for Canadian art would be the National Art Gallery, which is in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada. And obviously there are art exhibits all throughout the country. For example, in my university, which is in Kingston, that's where I graduated and went to school. Kingston is between, so if you have Toronto here, Ottawa's up here, and Kingston's kind of in the middle. The university also has a very good art gallery. So there's art galleries throughout the country, and that's just obviously artists. And then there's obviously Canadian musicians that you can find playing concerts throughout the country. In terms of writers, probably one of the most famous ones is the poet Leonard Cohen, and also the writer Margaret Atwood, which is also a very famous Canadian writer.
What money do you use in Canada?
In Canada, we use the Canadian dollar, which is valued about the same as the US dollar, depending on the month, depending on the year. It could be worth basically the same. Sometimes it's worth less, sometimes it's worth more, kind of like here with the US dollar. It goes up and down, so sometimes the US dollar is worth more than some other days. Same with the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar. And the currency it's kind of similar to the Colombian currency in the sense that each different bill, so each different banknote, is of a different color. Unlike the US where it's all green. In Canada, it's of different colors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
But